By the way, I don't know if you people appreciate what you've got in your midst. Because you have here today not one, not two, but 3 EWTN rock stars. Dale's show, The Apostle of Common Sense, which I help him with by doing scenes from Chesterton and various other little skits, of course, is a popular show on EWTN. Joseph hosts The Quest for Shakespeare on EWTN. My company and I help by doing Shakespeare scenes on his show, so we're involved in both productions. And I host my own show on EWTN. It's called The Theater of the Word Incorporated, and it's a, thank you, we have a 13-part anthology series of Catholic drama, and it's one of the most popular shows on the network. It's so popular that it airs at 5:30 in the morning on Thursdays. So just be glad we're here. My wife Karen and I run 2 production companies. Upstage Productions is one of our businesses. We do interactive comedy murder mysteries. We've been doing that for 20 years. We do them all over the country. That's how we make our money. Then we run Theater of the Word Incorporated, in which we evangelize through drama. That's how we lose our money. We've got, oh, by the way, that's the way, we've been talking about transforming the culture. Joseph talked about beauty. People are captivated by drama, so that's our particular way of trying to do it. So what you're going to see here in just a minute is I brought along an actor from my company, the Theater of the Word. He's going to do a one-man Hilaire Belloc show, which is really just Belloc lecturing to you verbatim, really, a Reader's Digest condensed version of his book, The Great Heresies, which is about the history of the heresies in the Catholic Church, but it also touches upon much of what Joseph was saying about truth, beauty, and goodness, and how we evangelize and how we live. So you'll see that in just a minute. This guy's good. The guy I brought with me is really good. He's going to do a great Belloc, okay? If you're feeling a little sleepy, having just had lunch, Belloc will wake you up. Okay. First of all, we have some interactive giveaways. This is from Dale's table. Dale and I were made to share a table for our merchandise. Dale has 95% of it. I have 5%. From Dale's large, vast collection, this magnet, which we're going to give away for free if you can answer a question. It's a $4 value. It's a magnet of Chesterton receiving an honorary degree, and the quote is, "Without education, we are in a horrible and deadly danger of taking educated people seriously." The question you're going to have to answer, and this is an easy one, you're going to see Hilaire Belloc, who was one of Chesterton's dear friends, here in a minute. George Bernard Shaw said that G.K. Chesterton and Hilaire Belloc were not 2 creatures, but one. What did he call that one creature? Raise your hand if you know. In the back, yes. That's you, sir. That's you, yes.
Chester Belloc.
Father. The Chester Belloc! Father gets it right! And he's coming up to receive his magnet. See, we got some smart people out here. Thank you, Father. Yes, indeed. This one's a little trickier. We're going to give away a Theater of the Word pen, retail value $1. Even though it's a harder question, it's a cheaper gift. This is a question that somehow relates to the Catholic literary revival. There's a hint. There are only, most saints or blesseds in the Catholic Church have feast days that celebrate the day they died. I only know of 2 saints or blesseds who have a feast day celebrating the day that they converted to the Catholic Church. January 25th, we celebrate the conversion of St. Paul. As far as I know, there's only one other saint or blessed whose feast day celebrates his conversion. Who would that be in the back? Cardinal Newman, October 9th. There we go. She wins a pen. She has to come up and get it. That's the price they pay. So if you want to pray a novena to Blessed John Henry Cardinal Newman, you would start today. I'm sorry. You went to his beatification. Marvelous. We filmed a little bit, a 17-minute long movie about the conversion of Newman, in which I played Dominic Barberi, who was the Passionist priest who received him into the church. And our friend Frank C. Turner, who looks just like Newman, plays Newman. We filmed it at Littlemore, actually where it happened. Newman's bedroom, Newman's chapel, where he actually was received into the church by Barberi, so we had access to that. Okay, the final one is the hard one, and I'm giving away my book. This book, The Church of the Kevin, was called by one man one of the 10 best books of 2010. Of course, it was Dale Ahlquist who said that. But he said it in an official publication on the Ignatius Press website. He listed this officially as one of his 10 favorite books of 2010. I'm selling them at the table out there, the little space I have next to Dale. And I'm going to give this away. It's a $15 value. But this is a tough question. You've really got to know your Bible to get this right. So all you Protestants out there have an advantage. Okay. Other than St. Paul, there are 4 other apostles who wrote epistles or letters in the New Testament. Who are they? If you don't know all 4, piece them together. We're going to see if Kurt knows. Yes, Kurt.
James, John, and Jude.
James, John, and Jude. There's one more.
Oh,
Kurt, how embarrassing. How embarrassing for you, Kurt. So close. Okay, who's the other one? Not Timothy. Peter, yeah. Letter to Timothy. There's letters to Timothy.
I got a heckler. He messed me up.
Yeah, I know. It was that priest in the back who messed you up. We're going to count you as the winner, madam. So come on up. We have a winner, ladies and gentlemen. She's getting the book. Kurt was so close and yet so far. Here we go. We asked that question. We did a show in Princeton, New Jersey once, and we had a full house in a church, and we had a boy in the front row who was about 8 years old sitting next to a woman, and I asked that question, the name of the 4 apostles other than St. Paul who wrote epistles, and the woman whispered the answer to him, and his hand shot up. So I called on him, and he gave me 4 names I'd never heard of before. 4 names that I don't even think are in the Bible. So I said, well, that'll teach you, son, never listen to your mother. And he said, she's not my mother, she's our director of religious education. And that is a true story. We're also selling some of my Journey Home appearances on EWTN. Once I was on as myself, and I talked about my conversion from atheist to Catholic, mostly through the beauty of drama. Then we have 2 that we're selling here today. One where I portray St. Paul, and St. Paul talks about his conversion, and I also portray Blessed Dominic Barberi, who talks about Newman's conversion. And the wonderful movie we made with Dale's help and the help of the American Chesterton Society on the Father Brown story, the Honor of Israel Gow, in which I got the great chance to play Father Brown. So we're selling that too. Okay, I am now going to introduce someone who's going to introduce Belloc to you. Ladies and gentlemen, this man wrote a biography on Belloc, a great book. This man just spoke to you, so you know who he is. I'm introducing the introducer. Here he is, Joseph Pearce.
Well, it gives me great pleasure, and I'm very excited to introduce the next speaker, who I've never actually met before, because I thought he was dead. But you know, the world's full of surprises. Hilaire Belloc, as I'm sure you all know, is one of the great writers of the 20th century, one of the key figures of the Catholic literary revival, a true man of letters in the best and every sense of the word, in the sense that he was, in my opinion, one of the finest poets of the 20th century, also a great biographer, a great historian, a great political thinker, a great satirist, a great essayist. I don't know what else to say about Hilaire Belloc. I've said it all in one of the books. I haven't mentioned all the books I've got for sale out there, by the way. Take your time changing Belloc, because I'm going to spill for my books. No, I'm not, but my books are also for sale out there, and if I'm not actually standing by the table, go into the little room, and Tom is actually taking the money. But as for Hilaire Belloc, when I was asked to introduce him, apart from being excited at the prospect of finally getting to meet someone who I thought was dead, I thought, how do I best introduce such a great man? And I actually thought of perhaps my favourite book of Belloc's, which is The Four Men. And there's some lines of poetry in that, and I'm hoping I'm going to remember them properly. If I don't remember these lines of poetry properly, I'll remind you of Chesterton's words. There's a thing is worth doing at all, it's worth doing badly, and that includes the recitation of poetry. So please correct me if I get it wrong. But these are, to introduce Belloc, these were the words that came to my mind. He does not die that can bequeath some influence to the land he knows, or dares persistent interweave love permanent with the wild hedgerows. He rides his loud October sky. He does not die. He does not die. Ladies and gentlemen, he is not dead. I give you Hilaire Belloc.
Although most of you don't know me, you do know my friend, G.K. Chesterton. When you have a friend, if you love a person, you have to be willing to sacrifice for that person, including fight for that person. I'm going to recite now a poem that I wrote in answer to an attack upon my friend Chesterton by an English don. A don, of course, is what you would call a college professor. We had a professor who attacked my friend Chesterton in print, and so I defended him with this little ditty. Remote and ineffectual dawn that dared attack my Chesterton, with that poor weapon, half impelled, unlearnt, unsteady, hardly held, unworthy for a tilt with men, your quavering and corroded pen. Don poor at bed and worse at table, Don pinched, Don starved, Don miserable, Don stuttering, Don with roving eyes, Don nervous, Don of crudities, Don clerical, Don ordinary, Don self-absorbed and solitary, Don here and there, Don epileptic, Don puffed and empty, Don dyspeptic, Don middle class, Don sycophantic, Don dull, Don brutish, Don pedantic, Don hypocritical, Don bad, Don furtive, Don 3/4 mad, Don since a man must make an end, Don that shall never be my friend. Don different from those regal dons, with hearts of gold and lungs of bronze, who shout and bang and roar and bawl the absolute across the hall, or sail with amply bellying gown enormous through the sacred town, bearing from college to their homes deep cargoes of gigantic tomes, dons admirable, dons of might, uprising on my inward sight, compact of ancient tales and port, and sleep and learning of a sort, dons English, worthy of the land, dons rooted, dons that understand, good dons perpetual that remain a landmark, walling in the plain the horizon of my memories like large and comfortable trees. Don very much apart from these. Thou scapegoat Don, thou Don devoted, Don to thine own damnation quoted, perplexed to find thy trivial name reared in my verse to lasting shame. Repulsive Don, Don past all bearing, Don of the cold and doubtful breath, Don despicable, Don of death, Don nasty, skimpy, silent, level, Don evil, Don that serves the devil, Don ugly. That makes 50 lines. There is a canon which confines a rhymed octosyllabic curse, if written in iambic verse, to 50 lines. I never cut. I far prefer to end it, but believe me, I shall soon return. My fires are banked, but still they burn, to write some more about the Don that dared attack my Chesterton. And now a very brief poem. I know most people don't like poetry in this country. A very brief poem. This one is called The Pacifist. Pale Ebenezer thought it wrong to fight, but Roaring Bill, who killed him, thought it right. Thank you. Tonight I will shall be delivering a lecture based upon my book, The Great Heresies, which was published in 1938. The book attempts to give a brief analysis of several heresies which have attacked the Catholic Church. I am told the last heresy with which I deal, the modern attack, has only grown more powerful, more pervasive, and more cruel since the time of my writing. The last section of my lecture and the concluding section of my book is therefore seen by many to be a kind of prophecy. But prophecy or no, it is at least, I trust, a clear-headed analysis of the modern threat. And since that threat has only grown more powerful, your beleaguered generation has not had the benefit of either clear-headed historical thinking or perhaps even a Catholic who does not mince words. That, at least, you have before you now. I propose in what follows to deal with 5 main heresies whose attacks upon the Church have marked her long history. I will touch upon them briefly in chronological order. 1, the Arian, 2, the Mohammedan, 3, the Albigensian, 4, the Protestant, and 5, one to which no specific name has yet been attached, but which we shall call, for the sake of convenience, the modern. Now, in dealing with heresies, it is important to consider the spiritual and therefore the social effect of them, much more than their mere doctrinal error, although that doctrinal error was the ultimate cause of all their spiritual and social effects. There is no greater error in the whole range of bad history than imagining that doctrinal differences, because they are abstract and apparently remote from the practical things of life, are not therefore of intense social effect. As the late Mr. Gilbert Chesterton said, if some small mistake were made in doctrine, huge blunders might be made in human happiness. Let us begin then with the heresy of Arianism. Arianism was the first of the great heresies, flourishing in the 4th and 5th centuries. It denied that Christ was both fully God and fully man. The Arians maintained that our Lord was created. He was merely a man, he was not God. Had this movement for rejecting the full divinity of our Lord gained the victory, all our civilization would have been different than what it has been from that day to this. Deny, as the Arians did, the incarnation, and human dignity is lessened. The authority of our Lord is weakened. He appears more and more as a man, perhaps a myth. The substance of Christian life is diluted. It wanes. What began as Unitarianism ends as paganism. And so, in the struggle of the Orthodox forces against the Arian heresy, we have on the one side the Catholic temper and tradition, and on the other a soured, proud temper, which would have destroyed the faith. But over a 300-year period, the Arian heresy was destroyed in the West, thanks largely to the heroic efforts of St. Athanasius and to the military success of the Frankish general Clovis, although many Arian sects continue to survive. What put an end not to these sects, for they still exist, but to their importance, was the sudden rise of that tremendous force antagonistic to the whole Greek world, Islam, the Mohammedan heresy out of the desert, which rapidly became a counter-religion and remains the implacable enemy of the church. Let us deal then with Islam. Islam, the teachings of Muhammad, conquered immediately by arms. Muhammad's Arabian converts charged into Syria and won there 2 great battles. They went on to overrun all of Egypt. They pushed further and further into the heart of our Christian civilization with all its grandeur of Rome. They established themselves all over northern Africa. At last, a long lifetime after their first victories in Syria, they crossed the Straits of Gibraltar into Western Europe and began to flood Spain. They even got as far as the heart of northern France, between Poitiers and Tours, less than 100 years after their first victories in Syria in AD 732. By then, a main part of the Roman world had fallen under the power of this new and terrible force out of the desert. It very nearly destroyed us. It kept up the attack against Christendom actively for 1,000 years. And the story is by no means over. The power of Islam may at any moment re-arise. Mohammedanism was a heresy That is the essential point to grasp before going any further. It began as a heresy, not as a new religion. Its vitality and endurance soon gave it the appearance of a new religion, but those who were contemporary with its rise saw it for what it was, not a denial, but an adaptation and a misuse of the Christian thing. Its chief heresiarch, Mohammed himself, was not like most heresiarchs, a man of Catholic birth and background to begin with. He sprang from pagans, but that which he taught was in the main Catholic doctrine oversimplified. He accepted from the teachings of the church the unity of God, his divine nature, the immortality of the soul, even reverence for Our Lady. Muhammad's followers even got from the early fathers some vague hint of her Immaculate Conception. But the central point where this new heresy struck home with a mortal blow against Catholic tradition was a full denial of the Incarnation. Now, why did this new, simple, energetic heresy have its sudden, overwhelming success? One answer is that it won battles. It won them at once. But the other is that Islam relieved men of the social strain of slavery and usury. The slave, who admitted that Muhammad was the prophet of God and that the new teaching had therefore divine authority, ceased to be a slave. He was henceforward free. The debtor who accepted was free of his debt. Usury was forbidden. The Mohammedan conquest did not, as has been so frequently repeated, destroy at once all that which it came across. It did not exterminate all those who would not accept Islam. It was just the other way. It was remarkable among all those powers which have ruled these lands throughout history for what has wrongly been called its tolerance, but the Mohammedan temper was not tolerant. It was, on the contrary, fanatical and bloodthirsty. It had no respect for, nor even curiosity about, those from whom it differed. It regarded with contempt the high Christian culture about it. It still so regards it, even to this day. Now, in this brief lecture, I can only allude to the Mohammedan military advance and to the Christian reaction, the Crusades, which, though successful at first, eventually failed, allowing the Mohammedans to continue to threaten the very existence of Christendom. In fact, the Islamic military advance was checked only as recently as the last years of the 17th century. Vienna was almost taken, and only saved by the Christian army under the command of the King of Poland on a date that ought to be among the most famous in all history, September 11th, 1683, less than 100 years before the signing of the Declaration of Independence. This is followed throughout the 18th century by Europe outpacing Islam in scientific and material advance. All through the 19th century, this process continued. The Islamic world now lags behind the European world materially and is considerably restricted from the territory it once commanded. It would seem then as though the great duel was now decided. But can we be certain it is so decided? I doubt it very much. It has always seemed to me possible and even probable that we would see a resurrection of Islam and the renewal of that tremendous struggle between the Christian culture and what has been for more than 1,000 years its greatest opponent. There is no reason whatever why Islam may not become our equal in all those temporal and material things in which we now have superiority over it. Whereas in faith, we have fallen inferior to it. Let us pass from the heresy of Mohammedanism to the heresy of Albigensianism, which flourished in Europe in the 12th and 13th centuries. The doctrinal error of which the Albigensians were a main example has always been latent among men in various forms in every time and place. It has struck out against the church in three great waves: Manichaean, Albigensian, and Puritan. Now, what is this general tendency or mood which in its earliest name was called Manichaean, which in its most clear-cut form with which we are about to deal is called Albigensian, and which we know in modern history as Puritanism. What is the underlying motive power which produces heresies of this kind? To answer that main question, we have to consider a prime truth of the Catholic Church itself, which has shortly been put in this form. The Catholic Church is founded upon the recognition of pain and death. In its more complete form, the sentence should rather run, the Catholic Church is rooted in the recognition of suffering and mortality and her claim to have provided a solution to the problem they present. This problem is generally known as the problem of evil. How can suffering and death exist in a world created and maintained by a God who is good? Various solutions to this problem have been proposed throughout history, from the stoicism of the classical pagans to the formalized despair of the Buddhists. What the Catholic Church says, we all know. She says first that man's nature is immortal and made for beatitude. Next, that suffering and death are the result of his fall, that is, of his rejection of the will of God. She says that since the fall, our mortal lives are an ordeal or test, according to our behavior, by which we regain, but through the merits of our Savior, that immortal beatitude which we had lost. But now the Albigensian was so overwhelmed at the experience or prospect of suffering and by the appalling fact that our natures are subject to mortality that he took refuge in denying omnipotent goodness to a creator. He said that evil was at work in the world just as much as good. The two principles were always fighting as equals, the one against the other. Such an attitude bred all sorts of secondary effects, but there is one thing which the Albigensian of every shade has always thought, and that is that matter belongs to the evil side of things. Matter is subject to decay and is therefore evil. Our bodies are evil. Their appetites are evil. The idea ramifies itself into all sorts of absurd details. Wine is evil. Pretty well any physical pleasure or half pleasure is evil. Beauty is evil. Joy is evil. Amusements are evil, and so on. Anyone who will read the details of the Albigensian story will be struck over and over again by the singularly modern attitude of these ancient heretics, because they have the same root as the Puritans, who still unhappily survive among us. By the year 1214, the Albigensians were militarily defeated by the Orthodox Catholic forces, and yet within 300 years of that date, a new and much more powerful heresy was to attack the very unity of the Church itself. This heresy is known as Protestantism. Let us deal then with the Reformation, which began in 1517 as an attempt to correct abuses within the Church. There was, in the early stages of the Reformation, no concerted attack on the Catholic faith. Even those who were most instinctively its enemies, Luther himself was not that, and men like Zwingli, who personally hated the central doctrines of the faith and who led the beginning of the looting of the endowments of religion, could not organize a campaign. There was, in the early stages of the Reformation, no constructive doctrine abroad in opposition to that ancient doctrine by which our fathers had lived, until a man of genius appeared with a book for his instrument and a violent personal power of reasoning and preaching to achieve his ends. This man was a Frenchman, John Calvin, and whatever his motives, he was certainly the founder of a new religion. For John Calvin it was who established a counter-church. The core of Calvin's doctrine was the admission of evil into the divine nature by the permission of but one will in the universe. And though Calvin's doctrines have rusted away, his vision of a Moloch god remains. And the coincident Calvinist antagonism to poverty and humility, the Calvinist devotion to material success, still survive. Usury would not be eating up the modern world but for Calvin. Nor, but for Calvin, would men debase themselves to accept inevitable doom. Nor, but for Calvin, would communism be with us as it is today. Nor, but for Calvin, would scientific monism dominate as it till recently did the modern world, killing the doctrine of miracle and paralyzing free will. But the fruits of Calvin were perhaps not the most damaging legacy of the Reformation. For the Reformation, unlike all the other heresies, led to no conclusion. The other heresies slowly died away, but the Protestant business has become a permanent thing. This is due to the fact that by the end of the 17th century, after generations of exhaustive fighting, a truce was called. The religious wars ended in a stalemate. By the year 1700, it had become apparent that Europe was to be permanently divided into two opposing camps, Catholic and anti-Catholic, in the only department that counts, in the mind of man. The effect of the religious wars, and their ending in a drawn battle, was that religion as a whole was weakened. More and more men began to think in their hearts, since this terrible struggle has had no result, the causes which led to the conflict must have been exaggerated. It would seem, then, that one cannot arrive at the truth in these matters. But we do know what worldly prosperity is, and what poverty is, and what political power and political weakness are, but religious doctrine belongs to an unseen world, which we do not know as thoroughly or in the same way. This denial of the powers of reason, this elevation of doubt, and ultimately this denial of truth itself leads us to the modern phase. And what that modern phase is, I shall now attempt to describe. We approach the greatest moment of all. The faith is now in the presence not of a particular heresy, the Albigensian, the Manichaean, the Arian, the Mohammedan, nor is it in the presence of a sort of generalized heresy, as when it had to meet with the Protestant Revolution from 300 to 400 years ago. The enemy which the faith now has to meet, and which may be called the modern attack, is a wholesale assault upon the fundamentals of the faith, upon the very existence of the faith. And the enemy now advancing against us is increasingly conscious of the fact that there can be no room for neutrality. The forces now opposed to the faith, designed to destroy. The battle is henceforward joined upon a definite line of cleavage, involving the survival or destruction of the Catholic Church and all, not a portion, of its philosophy. Now we know, of course, that the Catholic Church cannot be destroyed. But what we do not know is the extent of the area over which it will survive. To many who have no sympathy with Catholicism, who inherit the old Protestant animosity to the Church, although doctrinal Protestantism is now dead, and who feel that any attack upon the Church must somehow or other be a good thing, the struggle already appears as a coming or present attack on what they call Christianity. You will find people saying on every side that the Bolshevist movement, for instance, is definitely anti-Christian and must be opposed by Christians of all stripes, irregardless of the particular church to which each may belong, and is antithetical to Christianity, and so forth. Speech and writing of this kind are futile, because they mean nothing definite. There is no such thing as a religion called Christianity. There never has been such a religion. There is and always has been the Church, and various heresies arising from a rejection of some of the Church's doctrine by men who still desire to retain the rest of her teachings and morals. No. The quarrel is between the Church and the anti-Church. The Church of God and anti-God. The Church of Christ and Antichrist. Now, I do not entitle the modern attack Antichrist, though I believe in my heart that to be the true term for it. I do not give it that name because it would seem for the moment exaggerated, but the name doesn't matter. Whether we call it the modern attack or Antichrist, it is all one. There is a clear issue now joined between the retention of Catholic morals, teaching, and authority on the one hand, and the active effort to destroy them on the other. The modern attack will not tolerate us. It will attempt to destroy us, nor can we tolerate it. We must attempt to destroy it as being a fully equipped and ardent enemy of the truth by which men live. These things being so, let us examine the modern attack, the anti-Christian advance, and distinguish its special nature. To begin with, we see that it is materialist, and hence that it denies all forms of revelation. It ignores the fact that faith is at the root of knowledge, and it asserts that no truth is appreciable save through direct experience. The modern attack is also atheist. Being atheist, it is characteristic of the advancing wave that it repudiates the human reason. Such an attitude would appear to be a contradiction in terms. For if you say that we cannot through our reason arrive at any truth, then not even the affirmation made can be true. Nothing can be true, and nothing is worth saying. But that great modern attack, which is more than a heresy, is indifferent to self-contradiction. It merely affirms. It advances like an animal, counting on strength alone. This, then, is the main character of the modern attack: materialist and atheist. And being atheist, it is necessarily indifferent to the truth, for God is truth. But there is, as the greatest of the ancient Greeks discovered, a certain indissoluble trinity of truth, beauty, and goodness. You cannot deny or attack one of these three without denying or attacking both of the others. And so, with the advance of this new and terrible enemy against the faith and all that civilization which the faith produces, there is coming not only a contempt for beauty, but also a hatred of it. And immediately upon the heels of this hatred for beauty, there appears a contempt and hatred for virtue. This, then, is the modern attack, the greatest and what may prove to be the last struggle between the church and the world. We must judge it principally by its fruits. And what are these fruits? First, we are witnessing the revival of slavery, the necessary result of denying free will, and that denial goes one step beyond Calvin and denies responsibility to God, as well as asserting a lack of power in man. The two forms of slavery, which are gradually appearing and which will grow more and more mature under the effect of the modern attack on the Catholic Church, are slavery to the state and slavery to private corporations and individuals. Next to the social fruit of the modern attack is the moral fruit, which extends, of course, over the whole moral nature of man. Those who would point to the modern breakdown of sexual morals as being the chief fruit in the moral field of the modern attack are probably in error, for it will not have the most lasting result. Cruelty will be the chief fruit in the moral field of the modern attack, just as the revival of slavery will be the chief fruit in the social field. The proof lies in this. Men are no longer shocked at cruelty, but indifferent to it. The abominations of the revolution in Russia, followed by those in Spain, are an example in point. Not only do observers on the spot receive the horror with indifference, but distant observers do so. There is no universal cry of indignation. There is no sufficient protest, because there is no longer in effect
the conception that man as man is something sacred. That same force which ignores human dignity also ignores human suffering. The last category of fruits by which we may judge the effect of the modern attack on the Catholic Church is the fruit that it bears in the field of the intelligence, what it does to human reason. When the modern attack was gathering 2 or 3 lifetimes ago, while it was still confined to a small number of academic men, the first assault upon reason began. It seemed to make but little progress outside a restricted circle. The plain man and his common sense, which are the strongholds of reason, were not affected. Today they are. See what has happened to the word logic, to the word controversy. Note such popular expressions as, "No one yet was convinced by argument." Or again, "Anything may be proved," or "That may be all right in logic, but in practice it is very different." The speech of men is becoming saturated with expressions which connote contempt for the use of the intelligence. Now I realize that in many ways I'm preaching to the choir. All of you have noticed these things, and some of you are quite concerned by them. But let me state that against the great heresies, when they have achieved the drawing power of being the new and fashionable thing, there arises a reaction in the Catholic mind. Such reactions begin obscurely. It is the plain man who gets uncomfortable and says, "This may be the fashion of the moment, but I don't like it." It is the mass of Christian men who feel in their bones that there is something wrong, though they have difficulty explaining it. And indeed, a heresy, when it is full of its original power, affects even Catholic thought. Thus, Arianism produced a mass of semi-Arianism running throughout Christendom. The Manichaean dread of the body and the false doctrine that matter is evil affected even the greatest Catholics of the day. There is a touch of it in the letters of the great St. Gregory. In the same way, Mohammedanism had its effect upon the Christian emperors of Byzantium and on Charlemagne, the emperor of the West. For instance, there was a powerful movement against the use of images, which are so essential to Catholic worship. Even in the West, where Mohammedanism had never reached, the attempt to get rid of images in the churches very nearly succeeded. And so we find even Catholic thought affected. But the good news is this. The nature and the intention of the modern attack has become increasingly clear. The ranks have lined up as if for battle. And though such clear division does not mean that one or the other antagonist will conquer, it does mean that a plain issue is defined at last. And in plain issues, a good cause, like a bad one, has a better chance than in confusion. It is the Catholic Church on the one side, and her mortal enemy on the other. The lists are set. Thus are we now in the presence of the most momentous question which has yet been presented to the mind of man. Thus are we placed at a dividing of the ways upon which the whole future of our race will turn. Thank you.
If Kevin O'Brien's in the house, we would like to have him come up and speak to you folks as Kevin O'Brien about the Theater of the Word Incorporated and his work in evangelizing the culture. Oh, Kevin, here you are.
I was back there.
What a surprise.
You were really good. Well, that's an example of what we do. With the help of Ignatius Press and Father Joseph Fessio, we started Theater of the Word, also with the help of the then Archbishop Raymond Burke, 4 years ago, and we've been traveling the country. We do about a dozen different shows. The plan is we're coming through again in March to do a whole week of shows in New England, and hopefully we can come back and do stuff in Rochester, Buffalo. They want us up in Ontario to do things and all that stuff. I'll just tell you a bit about some of our shows, and then I'll let you go so we can take a break. We do Socrates Meets Jesus, which is based on the book by Peter Kraft. I was able to get the rights to adapt that book for the stage and also for the screen. So we have been touring with the stage version for a few years. It's a brilliant book. And in fact, Tom Martin, you should bring it to Nebraska, because in that story, Socrates comes back to life, and Socrates looks a lot like Tom in our play version. He's just shorter. You can pretend. Socrates comes back to life, and he goes to a modern college and finds all this sloppy thinking among the professors and the students. It happens to be a Bible college, at which, of course, no one believes in Jesus. And so Socrates reads the Old Testament, and then he reads the New Testament, and he then engages in Socratic dialogue with the teachers and the students about the claims of Christ, and makes a demonstration that faith and reason do indeed go together. In addition to that, I've added to my stage version, Socrates deals with the moral laxity, isn't even the word for it, sort of a moral sense of ennui and boredom that inspire these kids to sleep with one another and have these bizarre sort of ho-hum relationships that used to be passionate, but now are just nothing. So part of what happens in that play is the kids who encounter Socrates are confronted with their moral failures as well as their theological and philosophical failures, as is the main character who plays the professor in that. Professor, what's his name in that? Professor, no, we got a different, it's something like Muddled, Professor Muddled, I don't know what it is. So that's one of our shows. We also do Adam and Eve Go to Marriage Counseling. And that's our way of presenting the stuff that you don't hear from the pulpits in a funny way. Adam and Eve, from their marriage counselor, who ends up being a mysterious figure, we find out his identity late in the show, they learn church teaching on love and sex and the theology of the body. They learn the kind of stuff that if the priest talked about it from the pulpit, he would get stoned. So we're able to present it, and people love the show, and they laugh at it, and they learn something. I think hopefully they take something home with them. We do The Journey of St. Paul, which is our show about St. Paul the Apostle, and then there's one or two others that are really good that people like that I can't even think of what they are right now. But we do a show on vocations that the Institute for Religious Life helped us get together, and all that stuff. So, I encourage you, we've got some flyers out there, we've got a website, and find out more about what we do. But we are engaging the culture through beauty and entertainment. I'll say this much. Christian drama and Catholic drama have gotten, justifiably, a bad name. Because who wants to go to church and see The Journey of St. Paul? I mean, that's going to be awful, isn't it? It's going to be preachy, it's going to take forever, it's going to be boring. And Dale and I have seen productions of Christian drama that are just that and worse. Our shows are always entertaining and engaging, first and foremost, because I come from a show business background, and if you can't entertain the audience, you're not doing any good. When we did Socrates Meets Jesus in South Dakota last spring, it was in the middle of nowhere. They had about 80 confirmation candidates, and they do confirmation in, I think, 9th grade there. So these are freshmen or maybe sophomores who were forced to come and see this show by their director of religious education. So these kids were sitting there with their phones ready to text. Once we got into Socrates Meets Jesus, once we got about 5 minutes into it, you could hear a pin drop in that room, because these kids, as resistant as they are to the Catholic faith before, during, and after confirmation, these kids were compelled by the fact that we're dealing with where they're at. Is there a rational case to be made for Jesus Christ? Why are we living like this? If we believe that all religions are the same, is there a basis to that belief? What would happen if a guy like Socrates, who in our show is kind of funny and goofy because he wears a toga and everybody else dresses normally, what would happen if he engaged us in the Socratic dialogue? What would our thinking look like? They get wrapped up in that and then the moral drama. So I think what we do is very important. I will tell you that there's unbelievable resistance to it from liberals and conservatives alike. And we are constantly fighting against a kind of despondency and despair because it's almost impossible to do this. We're trying to make movies too, and that might be easier actually, I don't know. But at any rate, we must be doing something good because it's the hardest thing I've ever tried to do in my life. But when people see the shows, they love them. You mean nobody likes Belloc, only you people would like Belloc. But the other stuff we do is much more engaging, and people love it, and they come up to us. So at any rate, support us with your prayers. Take our flyers, visit our website. Above all, book us at your parishes. We make these shows very affordable. You've got to get your fellow Catholics and atheists and children to see the stuff that we do, because it's evangelization through drama. Well, that's it. We'll see you after the break. Thank you.